Hello, everybody. Today I'm going to talk about ADHD and some methods for handling it in the classroom. I'm Shea. So, my inspiration for talking about this was based on my selection for the choice board. I opted to read a book, and the book that I chose was Taking Charge of ADHD by Dr. Russell Barkley. Here you can see the man himself and the book. And as you can see on the cover of the book, it is intended for parents, but the information provided would be helpful for educators, doctors. I think it's an excellent read if anybody's going to be working around children with ADHD. I really recommend it. I thought it was an excellent read. So I'll talk briefly about what ADHD is. So, of course, attention deficit and hyperactivity disorder, traditionally you would expect to see children who have trouble paying attention and then who are particularly energetic or hyperactive in the classroom. More current definitions involve a lack of executive functioning and self-control. So that would be, of course, self-control, staying motivated, staying on task, not doing quote-unquote bad behaviors. And then executive functioning would define anything like staying on task, staying motivated, down to basic hygiene and interpersonal tasks, like being a functioning member of one's community. In people with ADHD, you see issues in those areas a lot. Barkley proposes a definition of ADHD that involves what he calls temporal awareness. So Barkley says that the ADHD brain struggles to process time in the same way as your neurotypical brain, and that people with ADHD will not recognize deadlines or time passed the same way, and that specifically like using past ideas or even like current actions to look ahead into the future is limited in the disorder. There are theories and research into what causes ADHD. A common theme when they do CAT scans on the brain and MRI scans, you find that the prefrontal cortex, which I have highlighted in this image here, ends up being slightly behind developmentally than other parts of the brain. Usually it's 2 to 3 years behind what would be the appropriate level for the age. There's been findings that this is correlated to genetic predisposition. So ADHD has been observed to be passed down from parent to child. It can also be an environmental factor. So if the mother drinks or smokes during the pregnancy, you can find that same reduction in the prefrontal cortex. Couple pieces of misinformation around ADHD. The diet of the mother while pregnant has been shown to have no correlation to ADHD. And one other one that I thought was interesting, sugar has been found to have no increase in hyperactivity to the ADHD brain. This is just, I think, worth knowing. So, how does it present? Typically, it'll be identified between kindergarten and second grade. This is because this is where you start observing those behavioral issues and falling behind peers in behavioral management. And typically, students will fall about 2 to 3 years behind peers, which reflects that 2 to 3 year lack of development in the prefrontal cortex. Children will end up being distractible, especially in group work. I know there's a lot of trends to move, especially early education, into like group settings, but ADHD students can get distracted so much by peers that it'll end up actually hurting their overall performance. Failure to complete work or remember assignments or tasks. If you have a student who's forgetting books, forgetting assignments, leaving books at school and not being able to complete homework at home, those are what you want to look for. And then ADHD ends up having comorbidity with any learning disability, but it is found especially prevalent with anxiety and depression. And those two factors can lead to behavioral issues, which we see in a lot of elementary schools. So again, if you have a student who is acting out, maybe getting in trouble in the school more than they should, it can be a sign to look into ADHD evaluation and maybe IEP work. So then some classroom techniques. If you have a student who has been diagnosed with ADHD, they'll have the IEP, and typically the first thing you want to do is interact with their parents, because whatever you're going to be experiencing, their parents have already been working on. So the first thing that Barkley mentions in the book is keeping that open line of communication. We've, of course, talked about that in class 2 at length. And another big factor in both classroom and home techniques is some kind of extrinsic motivation. Now, Barkley highlights that you want to avoid this with your neurotypical students because you want to encourage that intrinsic motivation, but ADHD students won't have the intrinsic motivation anyways. There's not going to be a real way to generate that. So it's okay to use external rewards more frequently and even completely if it gets them working. So the example used is some kind of point or token system that exists both at home and at school. The big thing to remember there is not only keeping that open line of communication with parents, but making sure that the expectations are consistent between home and the classroom. Clear and constant feedback was another note that Barkley really wanted to point out. If you see good behavior, mention it. And if you see bad behavior, mention it. Give the student constant feedback. Barkley even recommends that teachers could keep a number of tokens or coins in one pocket and move them over to the other pocket, let's say 10, over the course of a lesson whenever they've given the student feedback to make sure that the student is getting as much feedback as is necessary. Making expectations crystal clear is very important, and again, working with parents to be working towards the same set of behaviors and the same goals. And punishment is a viable strategy, but it's recommended that you work on reinforcing good behaviors and just verbally addressing bad behavior for a week before you punish any bad behavior. But it is an effective strategy. And then the final piece of advice is it's very detrimental to development and to progress if you as a teacher get exasperated or fed up and react rashly to any kind of student behavior. So the big piece of advice is to take 10 seconds whenever some behavior has happened, collect your own thoughts, and then react to it and give that student feedback in a clear and collected way, which will do wonders for behavioral development. The one thing I didn't put on here, but another note that the author of the book makes is it's important to look at ADHD through a disability lens. It is a disability, it is a disorder, and while it can seem like students might be doing activities or behaviors just to get back at you, typically it's not vindictive, but is a symptom of that disorder. So again, it's important to retain that mindset and not get personally offended or angry at the student. So yeah, there's a jumping off point for handling ADHD and what to look for in the classroom. Thank you.